I thought it was already recording.
No, not yet. Now we're recording. All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Out Young and Kinky, or OYNK for you little piggies out there. Today we are joined by Mikayla and Zed for our conversation on kink as a performance. Before we get into our conversation, we have some organizational updates, probably our first ones ever. Moving forward, we will be hosting our events at Rock Bar on Christopher Street. And we'll start doing our events there in August, and we will be moving to the first Wednesday of every month, with the exception of that first August. But by the time that posts, we will already have that one done and in the books already. So we'll be at Rock Bar the first Wednesday of every month moving forward, and we're happy to join their family of kink events. It's where the New York City kink and fetish scene has really moved to in the gay community, and we're really happy to be in the likes of their perv party and the chastity social that's hosted there and the ABDL club. We're very happy to be included in their kinky family now. So let me kick it over to Zed first to introduce himself.
Hi. Okay. Hi, I'm Zed, him pronouns. I guess I started out as a Shibari bondage bottom, but now I'm trying to switch a little bit more in Thai. Yeah, and on the side, I'm trying to finish up my PhD in performance. So I guess that's why you asked me to be talking about performance today. Hopefully, I'll be able to give some insight. I'm not quite sure, but I'm happy to be here and yeah, the conversation.
All right, Mikayla, you're up.
Hi, I'm Mikayla. I use she, her pronouns. I've been performing kink for a little over 2 years now, and I'm excited to be here and get into this. And thanks for having me.
Cool. We're excited to have both of you.
Thank you.
Dad,
All right,
you
so
wanna
we
kick it
always
off with the
start
first
these
question?
things. We scripted that. Who's missing their cue?
Well, this is our first time not doing it with an audience. It's kind of difficult without the energy to play off of. It's weird. It's different. It's some adjustment.
I will ask the
We
first
just
question then.
we'll
Let me
just
be
stare
the
at each
dom
other
in
in
the
the
room
boxes. Yeah, go
or in
ahead.
the virtual chat room. All right. So I always like asking the question for every single panel we do. And it's where were you? How old were you when you first started getting into kink? Mikayla, jump in.
All right, I'll jump in. I honestly have massive memory gaps from my childhood, but I have this one. Not too long ago, I was going through my phone and I found pictures of my best friend who I've been friends with since I was 2 years old, and another friend of ours in high school. And I had seen a picture of them just tied up next to each other in her room, and I'm just like, this is so out of context. And then I'm just thinking back, I'm like, yeah, I remember vaguely sitting in her room one day and just being like, I have this rope, can I tie you up? And that's kind of one of the earlier things that I can recall just because there's photographic evidence of it. I remember having lots of deprived thoughts way too young and spending far too much time masturbating in the living room and my mom being like, not here, maybe anywhere else when you're alone by yourself, when I'm not sitting on the couch next to you. How about that? How about
So
that?
not just practicing shibari early on, but also performing right from day one.
Oh yeah, straight out the gate. I was just like, oh, I have to do this by myself? That doesn't feel right. Like, we're having a great time right here. I just want to stay. I'm super comfortable. You know how to leave the room too. No, but and then I feel like in more of like what I consider like a public space and in the New York scene and everything, I guess that has been like an active part of my life for a little over 4 years now. And it's been amazing. It's like, totally, I don't know, an amazing experience. A totally different thing than just like having weird deprived thoughts by yourself as a kid and looking up videos on the internet and then scrolling to the last page so you really get the good stuff that's like
Mhm.
unfiltered and raw and
Yeah, it's so special when you like discover that community in person. How did you find, I mean, I guess in New York it's less hard to find than other places, but what was that part of the journey like for you?
So I was on Fields and I matched with somebody. I was still living upstate at the time, upstate Westchester, and I matched with somebody and they were just like, "Hey, can I tie you up?" And I was just like, and I saw some pictures of like stuff that they had done, and I was just like, "Can we grab a coffee first?" And we grabbed a coffee, and then a couple days later, I drove to like an hour and a half and got hung up from some dude's ceiling, and I was hooked. There was no stopping me at that point. I was just like, when are we doing this again? And again and again. And he brought me to my first pink party. And that was the first time that I got suspended in public as well. So it was like straight out the gate. And it was amazing. And then very shortly after that, I started making some more connections with different people who were tying, and things just like very, very quickly progressed from there because I was addicted. Like there was no stopping me again.
And I will say 90 minutes for an upstate hookup is not that far.
Okay, fair, fair. I was living
Frame of
distance. Yeah.
Well, it's
all
like
about
the equivalent of us traveling to Harlem,
That's true.
True.
maybe a little
Um.
further.
Actually, I live in the Heights, and it takes me like an hour and 10 maybe.
Okay, so roughly the
So
same.
and that's public transportation, okay? So
Yeah.
that's helpful.
So
I don't
Zed,
have to operate and then spend 30 minutes plus looking for parking. Anyway, carry on.
Zed, how about you? Where did you begin?
Oh, I was enjoying listening to the conversation, so okay. Let me adjust. How did I begin? I grew up in Singapore, so it's a little bit more taboo to be openly gay, much less be kinky, much more than being kinky. Um, so there are layers of taboo in finding community that isn't really what I struggled for a long time as I was growing up with like not only being gay but also having a kink. And I remember when I was younger, I would watch Hong Kong drama TV series, and there will always be the gangster who ties up like the villain, and somehow that was always erotically kind of imprinted in my mind and something that was interesting. And I didn't know what it was at the time. And there wasn't really a community to like be in conversation with. So that got filed away into an archive. It was only until much later, in around like 2008, when there were a few riggers in Asia, and specifically riggers of men. I remember Rai in Hong Kong, and there are a couple more in Malaysia. And occasionally they would travel around the region and they would announce online that they were visiting, and they were asking for people to like volunteer and sort of like meet and potentially get tied. And that was my first time getting tied by Rai, who was visiting from Hong Kong. And, that first experience was thrilling and exciting. And I guess like Mikayla, I was kind of hooked after the experience. But again, it's one of those things that was not easily accessible. And there wasn't a formal kind of space or education system in place like what we have here, like studios or spaces where you can go for munches or rope jams. So everything was very much like solitary. It was very isolating. It was only until after I moved to New York in 2017 And I found and met my husband, Tom, also known as Stick Two. And that's when I started to get tied a little bit more regularly. And from there, I basically met him and I moved in with him a week after. And I
Wow.
guess it was kind of physical and emotional bondage and commitment to each other. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, we got married. And I guess now, yeah, we are bonded for life in rope bondage and in life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into my kink.
So one thing I find interesting about both of your stories when we ask like how did you get started in kink, you both brought up like relatively coming across relatively like professional riggers, people who kind of knew what they were doing. Someone's doing suspension
Mm-hmm.
versus Mikayla, you hinted at these like earlier experiences where you're, just a kid with rope. Because I think about
Mhm.
what I call my first times was like with my high school boyfriend where we were both like, let's tie each other up and like we could do like attach an arm to a headrest.
Yes.
Which is different than shibari and the complications that go with that. Do you feel like there is a difference between what your experience is with someone who was doing more intentional, more academic bondage versus just the like tie point A to point B?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely also had that high school boyfriend experience of like, and now you will stay on the bedpost. But I guess like it was, I was on the giving end of that, and so I didn't, I guess I didn't really know what it felt like to be in bondage when I was in those experiences. So I did go very heavy into just like immediately tying with somebody who did know a lot about what they were doing. And I think it was kind of like interesting to have it be very much be in a situation where I don't know what is happening and I don't know what they're doing and I don't know how long it took them to learn how to do the exact thing that they're doing to me, and like it was all just like a very foreign concept of this intricacy, and like they knew where they were going with it and there was like so much certainty and everything. And I know now from having more experiences where I'm trying to do something that replicates that but I don't really have the right or the perfect like ability to tie that tie yet or something, and I'm like trying and I'm fumbling, and I think that those experiences are always like a little bit more vulnerable, I would say, in a different kind of way, because you're either messing up in front of somebody or you're watching somebody mess up. And I say mess up loosely, but just like maybe I just mean also be disorganized or not confident in what they're doing. And that kind of being a vulnerability in that in comparison to just being vulnerable to a person who's doing something to you and they know like all of it and they know what they're doing. And
Mhm.
does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just listening to Michaela's response, and there's one thing that was really important, which is the intention, you know. And I think that's separate from virtuosity. So that's separate from like skill level. What I've discovered is that what I appreciate in rope bondage, as opposed to like leather restraints or any other form of kink, is the kind of intimacy and connection, but also the time that it takes for a tie to happen. It's a commitment from both sides to spend that time together and to commit intentionally to an experience. And usually that happens with experienced riggers, but it can also happen with somebody with less experience. It might be fumbling, but it's still time that you have dedicated to be together and to sort of be intimate in role. Yeah, and I was really lucky to have met the rigger from Hong Kong and after that Tom, because I think they managed to deliver an experience that was beyond my expectations. So sometimes I wonder if I started out with somebody with less experience but still had the same intention or intentionality when they approach the scene, would I have had a different experience of what rope bondage can potentially be? Yeah, and I also think a lot about maybe there are a few people. I've also met people who are really insistent about not liking rope bondage. Sometimes I wanted to ask them, like, is it because of one or two experiences where perhaps your scene partner wasn't intentional in their approach, in the way they tied you, and that affected your experience of what rope bondage can be. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think some of what you're both talking about and hinting towards goes to the topic that we're talking about tonight, which is performance. And so we're both talking about the performance for the submissive, the performance the dom does for the submissive, the rigger does for the bunny, but also where does that change when there is an audience, a third party audience to that scene?
And I think it's gonna be like interesting to like hear about how Mikayla, you mostly perform like on stage in front of a live audience, and Zed, you do a lot of work on camera, a lot more than. Although we're doing a performance together on stage later this week, we normally do a lot more film work than we do, for lack of a better term, theater work.
Hmm.
And I'd love to start hearing about like connecting to an audience versus connecting to a camera.
Yeah. So for me, at least, I'll say I think that the audience exudes so much energy and can set such a tone. And so, like, having a live audience and having people react immediately to the things that are happening, like, creates such a great energy in the space that kind of like fuels me sometimes. And I feel like I can find myself doing things that might have been more challenging, or because I'm having like an abundance of like good feedback and like energy coming, that I just want to stay strong and like keep going. And that's like happening live. So I'm super interested to know, Zed, like how it is and what the energy is like when you know, because I might have an audience of, 150 people plus or something, but you might be online with like thousands of people, or you might know that your video is seen by hundreds of thousands of people. And so like you're feeding off of energy too, because it's going to come to you eventually, but it's maybe less of a live experience. I mean, I don't know exactly what kind of content you're putting out there, but if it's not an immediate like live chat, the instant feedback isn't there. And so, but you still know that there's all of these people that are going to be watching you. So do you get that same like fueled up sort of energy feeling, or are you just alone with your camera and all of the videos and the views and the stuff that happens after is just an afterthought for you?
So I have a really interesting account and experience of it. So Tom and I did this video called The Human Chandelier, which is this piece where he poured wax over me and like put candles on me. And it was a film that was selected and was screened at Hum Film Festival. So there was a very strange out of body experience when we are watching a scene that we created and we are sitting in the audience and hearing them respond to the scene. And yeah, I think that's part of the beauty about like performing for a camera. It's always for a future audience, and it can be yourself in the future too. You know? And to sit in an audience and feel their energy and how they're responding or laughing or smiling or certain moments when watching the film that you create is part of kind of deferred experience. So it might not be in the moment instantaneous kind of gratification or exchange of energy, but the exchange of energy is stretched out over a longer period of time. Yeah, so it really helps because for people who don't really know Tom in person, he's really an introvert. So the idea of being on stage and doing it live, I don't think it's possible. Yeah, it's not something we find pleasure in. But the idea of documenting it for posterity or creating a beautiful image and recording it so that the person who is getting tired would be able to see themselves in the image and see themselves in role. I think that's something that really encouraged or fueled us in the practice of photography, which is a huge part of our bondage practice. It's not merely the rope, but it's the rope and the photography and the photograph and the evidence and the witness. And I think there's another kink that we sort of talk about, but sometimes people just assume or just don't really regard it as a kink itself, which is exhibitionism. Exhibitionism is a kink. This desire to be seen, this desire to be desired in a way. And as much as our practice and our kink is bondage, almost 50% of it is also this desire to be put on display, this desire to see ourselves in bondage. Yeah. So that was something that we realized in the process of creation and making and over the years, really clarifying what we value about the scene itself and also what we value in the practice of photography. Yeah. And yeah.
Zed, do you think your motivation is coming from more within or coming more from the reaction from people seeing what you do?
I think for me, there's also a racialized aspect here, is from the desire to see more Asian representation in pornography. I think that's a huge drive, as to why I put myself out there, why I would want to participate in an economy and an industry that's inherently racist to begin with. It's racialized, it's the only space where race as a fetish is considered okay, race as a fetish category. And for me, that's a very interesting thing to grapple with. And particularly when it comes to rope bondage, because of the the different registers of Orientalism that is in rope bondage itself. There's a huge part of the community, for better or worse, who is drawn to rope bondage because it's exotic or it's Orientalist, in a way. And how do you grapple as an Asian person with that kind of Orientalism, you know? Yeah, but instead of shying away, I think part of the reason why I'm doing this, part of the reason why I'm putting myself in front of the camera, part of the reason why I'm documenting it is also there's evidence or to see people like myself on screen in films. Yeah, but hopefully also inspire other people because I remember when I was trying to assess kink bondage pornography when I was younger and in Singapore, we had a couple of options. There's the Japanese market, but the the different parts were always pixelated and it was always like really shameful. There's this pleasure of shame that Japanese pornography has. Then the other studio would be kink.com, but I never saw people like me besides Van, who was a pioneer in terms of bondage. Yeah, so yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Well, I think you're pointing to something just to share another like cultural touchstone. You're pointing something I think a lot about. I went to a friend's drag performance a few years ago, and I still am so moved by this performance. But it was a burlesque number. She's a Fujianese drag queen out of Brooklyn, performs under the name Pearl Harbor, and she has a piece about the first time she saw gay porn in Cantonese and how she cried. And I'm like, I've never watched porn and cried. But I also fully understand that moment of like, oh, I've never thought I even could see myself in these spaces.
Hmm.
And to be able to kind of take the ways that fetishization has shaped how we relate to kink and make it our own and actively engage in these spaces. Master R, I think you were going to say something. I didn't mean to jump on your toes.
No, I was just going to... See, look, I'm coughing already. The cough drops did not work.
I'm sorry, the conversation is so dense. I maybe we can like.
No, that's
inject some
exactly why we have
levity.
these conversations. But I wanted to ask Mikayla because I watched her performance at Folsom Street East the other day, which was probably the brattiest rope performance I've ever seen in my life.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
And you definitely got a lot of audience feedback from it.
Yes.
Do you want to just like describe the scene you did and like walk us through like what's going through your head during a scene like that?
I think I'm just watching my top. Like, I really am just trying to hone in on like what are they gonna do? What's going on? What's coming next? And how can I fuck with them while they do it? And I really, especially leaned into that this weekend. And now I need the permission to brat because nobody likes a brat when they don't want it, you know, like the annoying push. So like with that being said, that came out with permission. I don't know if she bit off more than she could chew, but if I came at her too hard and with too many bites and throwing ropes
Oh,
at
just to
her.
put it in perspective for everyone, Mikayla was hanging upside down from a single futomomo, swinging around trying to bite her rigger.
Yeah, it's just like
it was wild to watch.
And I think like the fun part too about like getting the space to be able to like act a little crazy and lean into being a brat is just like it gives me so much more oomph to keep going because they're gonna challenge me more to try to subdue my brat, and I'm like, no, we're gonna rise to the occasion, and then I have to just keep pushing. I have to just keep pushing and keep pushing until I really can't push anymore and I get scared or put in my place. But it helps, like, you know, I want to be able to take the next thing that they throw at me. I want to be able to, like, keep going and not, like, show face of being, like, you know, pained by it or put down by it. And I just, like, keep going. So then I think that kind of also allows my body to just, like, do a little bit of craziness, like hanging from a single foot L while I'm getting my other one tied and whipping around while I'm doing that instead of like just focusing on like deep breathing. And like that comes with being in a performance space also because like, you know, we might be in an energy where we're playful and I'm bratting and she's tying and we're doing that by ourselves, but with the energy of the audience and knowing that like we, you know, we are putting on a performance and like there's a little bit more like aimed into that being like out there instead of just the energy that's flowing between the two of us. We're like projecting it more. And so that when the reactions are good and then I'm also bratting and she's throwing more at me, there's like these two like pieces coming together that are just like, you can take anything. And then all of a sudden at the end of the performance when like my photos were dropped and I was just like in my two little arm binders hanging and I'm just like swinging around, I had not done that before, that moment. And that's the amazing thing about tying with her is I didn't we have tied together so much and we have such familiarity with each other that like there's a one look when she realized that my knees are not going to go down to the ground of if she needed to pull that rope back up or if she could just let it go completely. And if you watch a video of it happening, you can see it the split second, and that's just like this amazing thing of the connection that you have from doing something like this with somebody so often and just being like really in touch with each other is like then she knew she could drop it and her hands just opened and my knees went down and I just started swinging and it was amazing. Like I didn't know that I could do that and I loved that she just looked at me for a second and trusted me and I trusted her and the energy of the audience was there. That moment, that look was like so empowering and like we got this, like not me, not you, like us together in this moment and everything that we've done to get to this moment is what allowed us to just like go with that. And that's like I don't know, something that I find really beautiful and amazing. And so that was like probably the highlight of that performance for me, was just like being able to really have this moment that like all of the times that we've done this, all of the times that we've done this together privately have all come together to just be able to really have that look and trust and lean into a moment that was so exciting and energetic. And yeah.
Which is so interesting because during my performance at Folsom Street East, I also did something for the first time, which is hang on and like ride my bottom in suspension. Which is something you actually do regularly. You're like, oh, that's boring.
No, it's not. It's never boring to turn somebody into a swing set and then put your swing set to use.
But it's something that Jamie and I had never like planned to do. He had referenced it like 2 hours before our set, saying that it was like on his bucket list of like rope bondage things to do. And then I saw you and Trixie do it, and I was like, well, you know what? Today's the day.
I'm glad
And
that
maybe some of that is just like energy of the crowd and like being at a festival and like having that hype up, making me slightly overconfident.
So the question I have
yeah,
for
and
y'all,
you've tied with the person that you were tying many times, so I'm sure you understand that moment of like just like we're gonna do this together. Like we talked about it, or we've been close enough, whatever the case may be for your situation, and we have this moment. We're having a good connection point. We know we're ready, and we go for it. And
so the question I have for y'all, for kind of everyone, is like, A, were you a theater kid? And B, in what ways is kink performance different than other kinds of performance?
Zed, you go first.
Definitely a theater kid, but theater from a different tradition. Yeah, I did a lot of high school, college plays. I was actually doing a lot of backstage work, but I'm through and through a theater kid. But there are two different factions in Singapore. One is more Mandarin theater, and the other one is English theater. And if you come from a Mandarin theater tradition, it's more the imagination of a theater space as a revolutionary space, a space of change, space of connection, but also like changing the politics and what's happening on the ground. So I think that really influenced the way I approach theater or the performance, with the desire to really transform the viewer or to transform something in their consciousness, which is kind of kinky in a way. Yeah, Mikayla?
I was not a theater kid. I spent a lot of time watching Lord of the Rings as a child, and then I got into Taekwondo really young, and I just wanted to beat up all of the boys immediately. I was like, how do I do that? And they were just like, you have to buy the full sparring gear. And I was just like, done. Got it. Okay. Now send me out there, coach. Like, I'm ready. And I, that was probably an influence of getting into this. I don't remember what the original question was.
There's the
I just
second part to the
remember,
question,
yeah, the second.
which is like, what's the difference between like a theater performance and a bondage performance, right, Parish?
Oh
For
yeah,
me, something that I don't do a lot of live performances, but what I appreciate is like, you know, people who like when I'm thinking about really successful and really connected bondage performances that I've seen, like from Bondages and Sampler, there's this sense of play and this sense of joy. And it sounds like Mikayla's performance was also like that. There's this sense where this palpable sense of connection between the person being tied and the person tying. But at the same time, the audience is together with you in the scene because they understand the stakes of what's happening in front of them, which is a body that's being suspended in space. So I think there's that. But the thing about a bondage and shibari scene is that it's so much about interiority. It's so much about like emotional connection between two people on stage. And in theater, the principle is always like you have to turn it out to the audience. You have to face the audience. You have to turn and send your energy out into space. Whereas bondage is almost the other extreme, where it's like we are going to collect as much, and we are the nucleus, and we are pulling in this energy from you, the audience, and we are making this like tiny little thing on stage. So those contrasts and differences actually makes it really fascinating for me to think about performativity of bondage. Yeah, and how some people translate it more effectively than others. But even in the refusing to acknowledge the audience, because when I'm thinking about Hajime Kinoko, it's really about focusing into what's happening in this little thing here, but there's still some possibility of like drawing focus and attention. And everybody is there, watching him perform that. Yeah. Mikayla?
I don't think I have a great reference point as far as like knowing what it would be like to perform something else. I think that I never really thought of myself as a performer or thought that I would be performing or doing things like this in front of a crowd. So once it started, I think that was like really the start in totality for me. I mean, I had I haven't ever had the experience like you're speaking of, Zed, of like, creating a, a presence and like a show for an audience. It feels, when doing bondage for performance, it feels very like, you're in the limitations of what you can offer with the person that you're doing it with. And like, that is even more restrictive, I imagine, when you're adding rope bondage, because there's like skill sets that you have to take into consideration, and safety and environment and all of these things that I can only imagine are taken into consideration in a very different way when you're doing a general performance that does not include rope bondage. And I guess like the interesting thing is that with having experience with performing something else that might not be inclusive of rope bondage, you probably maybe get more practice on like feeding into a crowd and knowing like how to appease people more, maybe, or like add dramatics or something. And I feel like a lot of the time I lack that, and so I need it like authentically given to me instead of having to have like putting on this show in the sense of like it not being genuine. I need like the genuineness of things. So like if we are doing a performance that needs to invoke like some sort of like sexy, like deep thing, then like I really need to like sit there and like focus in on Trixie and like paying attention to her and sort of like getting hot and bothered by her instead of just pretending that I'm hot and bothered by her. Which, you've seen Trixie. It's not hard. But I I just have to like really lean into like the authentic feelings, because I don't have the performance background of like being able to create it or something in that sense, if that makes sense.
Well, some of I think what you're hinting at is when people talk about like that wrestling isn't real. It's the idea of like, okay, wrestling is scripted, but people are taking punches. And so where is that line, as opposed to like Hamlet, everything is faked. Whereas like kink and wrestling, several other types of performance in this vein, where it's like people know what's happening, but the reactions you're getting from people are genuine. That like wince is genuine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that is like another like interesting point between like Zed, you being doing a lot of film work, having those like very clear consent negotiations before you go on camera with somebody. You have a really clear, well defined plan on how things are going to work during the scene. Whereas with a like in person stage show, you can improv that quite a bit more than what you can do on camera, I think.
But I can tell you a lot of times we plan for the camera and we never end up following the plan. It's like things just happen, especially when you're dealing with rope, such a pliable material, and maybe like wax or rope, or there's always contingencies and things that can go wrong. And even even the best laid plans with me and Tom often end up getting abandoned. But whenever I try to perform on stage, I always try to like challenge myself and also challenge Tom in a way to rethink how we can imagine what bondage performance might look like on stage. So a few years ago, we did this performance at Folsom East where I said to Tom, like, I'm tired of like the bottom just being like the passive person submitting and getting tired. So we invited another performer, Riven, into the scene itself. So it's like a trio. And it became a scene where I was tying Riven was tying me. We had a single column around ourselves, and we started doing this movement weight sharing thing. But unfortunately, that was when the stage was really, really small, and very early on in the set itself, I fell off the stage.
Oh no.
And talk about like the audience, it's like they gasp. And when I eventually got onto the stage again, and they saw that there was this big gash on my back, and it was just bleeding, and the blood was like it's trickling all the way down to my ankles. But we continued doing the scene, and in a sense, it heightened the stakes of what we were doing on stage. It also, for me, live performance is about whether the audience is in the palm of your hands or not. Are they there with you? You know, even if you are doing nothing on stage, are they committed to being present with you? And yeah, maybe falling off the stage and getting a huge gash and seeing blood on stage is the right amount of like conviction that is required from Folsom. Yeah. But that was also the last time we performed. I think Tom was a little bit traumatized by that. He felt responsible for it, of course.
Oh
Yeah.
no.
How do you feel like it's different for you going onto a stage into a performance like that in comparison to like if you were having a scene in a public space and you got a crowd?
Oh, it's so radical. My least favorite thing about stage productions is having that countdown clock. Is having that your set time is 30 minutes, get your work done in 30 minutes. Especially because I started doing film before I was on stage, and when we filmed, it was just like, okay, we're going to block off 3 or 4 hours to get 30 minutes worth of content. It was more than enough time to get that in. Whereas for a stage production, I always feel like it's a race against the clock. And part of that is just my internal neurosis of like, I need to get everything done that I want to get done in the 30 minutes.
But I'm
But
also
like
wondering.
tying someone to a tree is always
Yeah,
like fun in a park.
yeah. I'm also wondering, in San Francisco, I guess there's a longer tradition of like bondage performances. So they actually have different models of duration. So they have like a 20-minute scene for Folsom, but they also have like durational scenes where it goes on for a lot longer. When they do like, I believe it's Twisted Windows, and they have a collective where it's like an evening long durational bondage performance. And I prefer that differences in, it's like different temporal structures and the possibility of doing something that is longer than a 20-minute scene. Yeah, because especially with rope bondage, it takes so much time, and it's part of the experience of tying and untying. And like what Master R said, if there's a countdown clock going, then it sort of defeats the beauty and the purpose of the bondage itself, which is about spending time and measuring time with rope. Yeah.
Zed, when you were saying before about like feeding off the audience and like feeling like they're present with you and in the palm of your hand, do you feel like if you find yourself in a public space doing a scene with somebody, and then people start watching you, do you still feel the same drive to feed into the audience and try to get them in the palm of your hand? Or because you're not in those very confined settings of going into a performance, are you less worried about the people watching?
It's difficult to tell. Number one, because I don't usually go. I don't do public play with Tom or my rigger as much. But the other thing is that usually when I'm doing a public scene like that, I'm blindfolded, so I won't be able to see. I can sort of sense like people are looking, but you don't really get a sense of like, yeah, how many people are watching you until the blindfold comes off, and you realize that everybody's just sitting there, just going like this. Yeah. How about yourself, Mikayla? Like, is there like you are you usually blindfolded when you play in public?
No, I don't find myself blindfolded much in any situation. Maybe I should change that. But I feel like I do have similar relations to an audience that is maybe quote unquote not supposed to be there, or just like passing through a space that I'm in rather than like specifically going out and performing for them. I think I can get some of the same energy in those situations. And I think like that's probably a result in like performing a lot with people who I would tie with regularly as well, and then also tie with in public situations where we're not performing. And then like just still feeding off the same energy of people being around, and then still having the same closeness with the person that I'm tying. I don't do a lot of performances, or I don't do any performances with like people who I don't have like some sort of personal relationship with. And so like the attention to detail to them and attention to like what we're currently doing together, I don't think changes if I'm going into a space knowing that there's going to be an audience watching me, or going into a space knowing that I'm going to do a scene with somebody and that people might watch at some point. So I find it interesting to know, like, when people have more experience with tying people specifically for performance, if it's totally a different energy that they're getting from scenes that have audiences.
Yeah. It also depends on whether the audience is a kink audience or it's a non-kink audience. And what we
Very
are seeing,
true.
yeah, what we are seeing a lot is a lot of shibari performances being compared to like circus acts or like acrobatic acts, and starting to go into spaces like that. And I wonder sometimes, what happens to the rope bondage in scenes like that. Whether because the audience is kind of folding their hands and sitting in their chairs and like sipping a cocktail and going like, "Oh, impress me," as opposed to an audience like at Folsom Street where we understand that that hurts, or we understand that that's a difficult position to hold. So this idea of being with the performer, and being in the space and doing this together, I think that the energy is also slightly different. I've never really performed in a non-kink space. I don't think I have a desire to, because it's just not the kind of bondage that I and Tom do. Yeah, but I'm curious. Maybe, Master, do you have experience performing in a non-kink space of a non-kink audience?
So, in a really funny story, I've gotten a lot of work out of just tying in public. I was doing a shoot last summer on Fire Island, just tying up a boy under the boardwalk, like suspended in air. And lo and behold, like we get a little crowd forming, and we're doing our thing, and someone comes up to us and goes, "I'm associated with this group. What you're doing here is really fascinating. I'd like you to come in and teach classes with the group I'm associated with." So you never know what's gonna happen. And like, if I wasn't tying someone up randomly on a beach one day, that would have never happened. I don't
I have
do
question if we need.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, just as we're heading, I'm cognizant of time. One question we had flagged is kind of the difference between tying and the kind of kink play for performance versus in your personal life, and how does that shift when you do start to professionalize your fetishes, your kinks?
There's a very long and deep sigh. Yeah, my answer is a little bit shorter, so maybe I'll go first. So the honest truth is, me and Tom, we don't do anything without the camera anymore. And it's not that we are finding it important to professionalize or to, it's just the dynamic of what we have. It's like we find a lot of pleasure with the camera as witness, you know, and we find a lot of pleasure performing and creating a beautiful scene for a photograph. And that's our kink. So there's almost no separation between like personal non-camera, off-camera kink and on-camera kink for us, because it's all lumped together and it's shaped and tied together. That's our practice. Yeah. Yeah.
I I guess I again, I tie with everybody that I perform with in my personal life. So there's not this crossover of like we would only do this in performance, but there's definitely the crossover of we would only do this in private. And I think that more plays into like when you're in a performance setting, you're leaning into your strengths and you're leaning into the things that you know that you can conquer on stage and around people. And when you're alone with somebody, you can fail and it not like take away from what you're trying to create for other people and what they're experiencing. And so there's more flexibility, I think, in personal settings sometimes to try something new, to try something that works really well in a different way instead of going for that in a public space or on stage. That's not really the setting for that. And so it's nice to have these personal situations to be able to try things and do things that are not non-reliable, I guess is a way to put it. And performances only really come down to like the reliability. And now I spoke earlier about how I was kind of in a situation where I didn't do something ever before that performance, but that reliability was built with Trixie and like with our bond together. It wasn't necessarily on where that tie was going to land and whatnot, but all of our time alone and all of our time in private and all of our time we've spent tying, getting to know each other in our bodies. That's what was the security in that moment. That was the reassurance and the safety net of being able to do something different that we might have not even thought to have tried behind closed doors and by ourselves. But the behind closed doors does allow for a lot more things like that to be discovered that then can become reliable. And then there's a lot of things that I don't perform. So that's all private life, I guess. And, not that I wouldn't take the opportunity to mummify somebody on stage or something, but it's a long, meticulous process that's pretty boring to watch. And it wouldn't be a performance. And so there's like a lot of things that I think fall into that realm and that lives in private life. And yeah.
Yeah, and also just to respond to Mikayla, I think part of the because Tom and I's practice is so much creating for the camera, that the way I negotiate with finding pleasure that is private is by playing with other people, finding other partners, feeling enriched or getting tied by other tops, or starting to switch and starting to tie myself. That's where the process of discovery and something that is just for me, happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it can be so enriching to the performance process as well. Like it's so fun to be fucking around with somebody, trying something new, and being like, this feels awesome, and you can sit on me while I'm in it, so let's do it. Like, I could be a swing set in this too. Add it to the list.
That was a really great moment, Master. I was there watching with Tom your performance at Folsom East, and definitely this moment when you were like climbing on him and like swinging off him. That you know, like every performance, there's this moment which is like the photograph for us, and that was that moment.
And you got it on camera and sent it to me.
I had to. It was made for the
But
camera.
I will cite my sources. Trixie and Mikayla did it first. I was inspired by them.
I'm glad that we can inspire you. I hope that you keep hanging off of people every opportunity.
You're in my official bibliography now.
Are you going to be hanging off me on Friday?
We'll see how much audience energy we pick up.
Cool.
Pick up on the vibes.
All on the vibes. Always tying on the vibes. Good. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know it's a little different. We're not in person. We don't get to be exhibitionists tonight and talk about our crazy shit we do in front of a live audience.
What irony.
It is a funny night for that.
Yes.
This is the behind the scenes intimate moment instead. That then is going to later go online. This is your world, Zed. This is the creating the moment that then will be sent off and enjoyed later.
This is my preferred mode.
It is pretty nice.
So I think the question we would have is, do y'all have anything you want to plug? Knowing that there is a delay, so current events is maybe not as helpful of a plug as just your socials.
Yeah, Tom and I will be traveling and teaching in several classes. So we'll be down in Atlanta, actually, where Parrish is, for Kink Down South. We'll be doing a class called, what's the title again? I can't remember. We'll be teaching. And then we're going to Seattle for Men Roping Men, and we'll be teaching class on photography and rope bondage there. Yeah.
Very cool. That sounds exciting. Cannot wait to see the pictures from that. I am performing with Trixie a few more times, I think, before she leaves. The thing that's coming up the soonest is our last figure drawing together, and then Tyler and I get to do one in July, which will be really fun, and that's in Brooklyn Hearts. And you can find those tickets on my Instagram, which is Don't Call Me Mick with an underscore at the end, and not Don't Call Me Milk. Please don't call me that or try to find me that way. I'm not Milk. And I'm also not Mick. I'm Mikayla. So putting that out there too. And Brooklyn Hearts is who hosts us for the figure drawing class, and they're awesome. And they do a lot of really cool figure drawing classes there that are kinky and not kinky, and definitely check them out. And that's my plug.
And my plug is, remember, we're now at Rock Bar on Christopher Street. That's where you're going to have to come to find us now. The first Wednesday of every month at Rock Bar. Starting off with Fireplay next.
Ooh. That sounds fun.
Yeah, I want to learn to light someone on fire. Mikayla, would you like to be lit on fire?
Yeah, you can light me on fire.
Okay, well, just tie your hair up. I'm a little afraid of the hair.
Yeah, definitely really far away from the hair, please.
Yes.
That's my fire limit, the hair.
It's so glad we have the same limits.
Perfect.
All right, everyone, go follow us at Out Young and Kinky on Instagram and everywhere you find podcasts, and smash all the buttons you can smash when you're listening to it on the interwebs, and 5 stars, and share with a friend, and download. Just hit all the fucking buttons. I don't care what they do.
All the buttons.
All of them.
Every single one.
All right, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Night, everyone.